Right. Okay, good people. So we're recording this event now, and it will be on our wonderful YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to it yet, please do. It's called psychologyatwork.blog, and we'll pop it in the comments. So welcome. So the reason behind this event is that I think there's a lot of interesting assessments out there and interesting psychometrics, and especially after the pandemic and during the pandemic, we might have not met up too often to exchange our knowledge, to see what we're doing. And for me, when it comes to personality assessments, after spending years spilling beer in bars, arguing, is it type or trait? Is it dark side or bright side? Came to a realization that it's all of it. It's like that old proverb of blindfolded people touching an elephant, and they're all blindfolded and they need to guess which animal it is. But because they're getting different textures, they think it's different animals. But all we're doing this with assessments, we're assessing the elephant in the room of individual differences that we call personality, which we don't really know what it is, but that's what makes it only more interesting. So today's event is hopefully to shed a bit more light on what is this elephant or this phenomenon of personality. And to help us with this, we have four fantastic speakers coming from four very interesting psychometric providers or publishers. So we'll have Podium first, then we'll have Hokama, then we'll have Lumina, and then we will have LMAP 360. The reason these four are gathered here today, because we feel they all bring their own individual perspective on this phenomenon of personality. And this event is all about learning from each other. So does that sound like a fun way to spend your Wednesday afternoon? And pair being cold, I'm very conscious of that. So yeah, it's okay. Just, you seem warm enough that you're wearing a sweater. So yeah. So without further ado, I'm very happy to pass you on to our first speaker, Carl from Podium. Carl, over to you.
Hello, everybody. It's about now that I always regret volunteering for this sort of thing because there's got huge audiences. So just making sure that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Let me just move some control bars onto my other monitor, otherwise I can't see what I'm doing. So if I now press that to run the, hopefully you're seeing my presentation, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. Good, excellent. So I'm making sure that you can see what I'm seeing. So good afternoon. Hi, everybody. There's a few names here that I know very well, a few names we've not met before, but delighted to be here. So time is short. We've got about 20 minutes. I'll get through as much as I can. I want to tell you about what we do at Podium with personality. And one of the things that we try to do is to be as closely aligned to the science or the most recent science as we can. We'll say a little bit more about that. So we'll talk about where we're coming from in terms of our scientific approach. And if time permits, I'm going to talk about two of our assessments, one called PQ10 and one called derailers. And in Nikita's introduction, he talked about, is it bright side, is it dark side? PQ10 is our normal personality assessment. Sometimes get normal personality bright side, and derailers is our maladaptive or dark side personality assessment. And I'll say a little bit about both of those if time permits. And I thought I also just wanted very, very quickly, if time permits at the end, just maybe quite an oblique angle to take the conversation. But we're going to talk about all of our efforts to produce the best quality personality assessments that we can. But I just wanted to throw into the conversation, really, maybe slightly provocatively, that we continually have the experience that no matter how good we try to make these things psychometrically, sometimes things that are not so robust psychometrically, but are just bright and shiny, will often be quite successful in the marketplace. And one of the reasons for that might be that whilst we concentrate on the psychometrics, sometimes we forget about the user experience. But I just wanted to touch on that at the end. So to help you understand what our PQ10 is all about, trying to do that in a structured and educational way, I wanted to try and help us to understand what PQ10 is, but also understand how we help people to apply that. And we've talked about trying to be close to the science, and I'm sure that the audience here is knowledgeable and experienced, and you'll know that it's an ever more crowded marketplace. And one of the reasons it's crowded is because some of the things that are in there just never go away, despite their age and relevance. So we still have assessments out there. I suppose we need to be diplomatic and sensitive, but we could think about things like DISC and MBTI, whereby with a modern understanding, we perhaps realize that the underpinning theories behind those things are perhaps obsolete, and we have a better understanding of what personality might be all about. And of course, any assessment is only a reflection of the model that sits behind it. And if that model is flawed, then the description of personality, and maybe picking up on Nikita's analogy, the description of the elephant we might make blindfolded is going to be flawed. So one of the things that we've tried to do with developing PQ10 is to build upon the most recent insights into personality theory from research. And you may be familiar with the research of people like de Jong and Peterson and others that have taken a neurobiological and a neuroscientific approach to understanding personality, and the identification of a structure that sits above the big five that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. Those are often referred to as the meta traits of plasticity and stability. We'll describe what they're all about in a little bit more detail as we go through. This was developed for Podium in partnership with our colleague who works with us, who I know is known to many of you, Dr. Nigel Ganol at Goldsmiths.
My name is Mohit, and I was calling for the update for the placement administration role.
Oh, right. We've got a telephone call going on somewhere. I'll try and
sorted. It's all good.
Where were we? So yes, so working with Nigel, he's obviously done lots of research into this area, and I know he's very clearly of the view that if you look back at many of the models that are built on the big five over the years, you'll often see that the number of contributing traits to the big five factors can be hugely variable. You know, some have 2, 3, 4, 5 contributing facets or personality traits behind each of the big five. The position that we take is that actually much of that is largely arbitrary. You know, there have been examples where technical manuals have said something like, oh, look, we've got 5 traits alongside this big five factor. Of course, it felt to be about the right number. Whereas realistically, if we want an independence between those factors, really having 2 contributing traits to each of the big five is what is much more supported by the analysis. And that's why we have this PQ10 structure. So we have 10 personality traits. As we developed this assessment, it has 90 items. So it's relatively short compared to much of what's been out there in the marketplace. We also tried to reflect within the item set this ABCD model that, again, I'm sure many people will be familiar with. So, you know, we've got items that reflect both that, all of the affective, behavioral, cognition and desire manifestations of personality traits. So we've got the meta traits at the top of the model. And we're not aware of any other commercial, although there are some academic instruments out there, we're not aware of any other commercial instruments that actually report those 2 meta traits, along with the big five and the 10 contributing scales that are measured through the questionnaire. This second column in blue, ideas, people, results, and resilience, just really comes in because our experience is that a lot of people who are end users of our assessments are not certainly psychologists by their first profession. They might come from many other directions into the human factors field. and they often will ask the so what question. So what does it mean? You can measure all of these things, but how do you apply it? And we're just trying to provide some focus to say, well, look, we're trying to help you understand how personality might influence certain areas of performance in the workplace. And that's our ideas, people, results, and resilience focus that we try to help people with to begin with. So we've got the meta traits, the big 5 scales, and those trait scales. If you use PQ10 and complete the administration, the reports that come out give us these plasticity and stability scores, these meta traits that I'll say a little bit more about shortly, the big 5 with which we are all familiar, and the 10 trait scales. I'll go through a little bit of description of those, but because time's short, we're not going to do an awful lot on each one of those. So when we talk about applying these, one of the things that we find is useful in user training is to say that as you use these measurements, we want to turn them into something meaningful. And I often use in our user training this analogy of painting a picture of the individual. The information that we've just shown you in those profile charts, we can turn numbers into that picture by considering that the meta traits might give us a high-level overview, analogous to the silhouette we might get in that portrait painting exercise. The big 5 start to give us some recognizable structure in describing that individual, and finally the traits give us that uniqueness, color shading within the picture. So in terms of applying that model, that's the kind of approach that we find that people can relate to and find helpful. We mentioned that plasticity and stability come from the neuropsychological neuroscience area into understanding personality. Those 2 meta traits are referred to often as alpha and beta. Alpha is stability, beta is plasticity. And plasticity is seen to be a function of the dopaminergic system, and dopamine is related to exploration and reward. And the analogy that we use when we want people to understand what a standardized score on our profile chart for plasticity might mean, the analogy that we use is that plasticity can be thought of as a little bit like the accelerator in a car. So somebody who is high in plasticity likes to live their life with their foot hard on the gas. They are curious and inquisitive and open to new experiences and keen to learn and engage with the world. Their foot is hard on the gas because they want to get round the corner to see what's there as quickly as possible. That exploration and curiosity. The other meta trait of stability, we use the analogy of the brake in a car, and somebody who lives their life with their foot hard on the brake is somebody who is keen to maintain that stability. We see openness and extroversion as the 2 big 5, if you remember that model diagram, that contribute to plasticity. And we've got openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability. The N in the traditional ocean model, we try to stay away from the neuroticism label because of some stereotypical misinterpretations of what that means. So agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability contribute to the stability factor. Stability is thought to be a function of the serotonin system. It's about that regulatory effect of serotonin. So maintaining stability in relationships through agreeableness, maintaining stability in goal adherence achievement through conscientiousness, and stability and emotional regulation in that emotional stability area. I'm not going to talk too much about the big 5. This is a presentation that we use elsewhere that I've just repurposed for today, but I'm going to assume, looking at the audience, that most people here are very familiar with the big 5, and we use the big 5 in exactly the way that I'm sure you are familiar with. Just a very small practical point. We have not adopted bipolar labels in our use of the big 5. So with extroversion, for example, we talk about high extroversion and low extroversion. So STEN 10 being high extroversion, STEN 1 being low extroversion. And again, it's just trying to think about the way in which people engage with the results of assessment. And we find that the adjectival labels that we use for any of the scales can have an effect in that engagement with the results of a questionnaire. And it's a continuous and ongoing debate. We've gone for high extroversion versus low extroversion, mainly because we've often observed people taking stereotypical misconceptions as to what it means to be introverted, for example. But that's just a little bit of an aside. So we saw the model of the trait scales, and for the reasons discussed, we stick to two contributing traits to each of the big five. Creativity and inquisitiveness are the traits that speak to openness. Again, very short for time here, so I'm not going to go through lots of detail about the behavioral interpretations for each of those. Extroversion, we have this scale of empowerment or power and sociability. Just an interesting note about this empowerment scale, our experience has shown us that this is very much related to and predictive of emergent leadership behaviors. So in any leadership work we do, we found this to be of particular interest, and sociability as part of extroversion, as you might expect. Agreeableness, we have scales of compassion and diplomacy. And in terms of that emotional stability piece, we have, conscientiousness first, we have drive and orderliness. And then emotional stability is emotionality and confidence. PQ10 is a BPS registered test. It's been through the review process. We were pleased with the results of that review. We've got good evidence in the reliability area for both internal consistency and retest over both short and long term. So we've got really good data to show that results on the assessment remain stable over really meaningful periods of time. There's in the technical manual, we've got lots of construct validity evidence, as you might expect. But again, I'm not going to delve deeply into that at this point, just because of time. We've got criterion validity evidence in there of some depth as well. We said at the beginning that we want to try and keep up to date with the science and what's happening in the world of research around understanding personality. And from around 2000 onwards, again, many of you might well be familiar with the hexaco model of personality that is emerging. You might have, some of you might have read the book, Putting H in Personality, and that suggests that there is an area that has been revealed through that perhaps quite traditional psycholexical analysis approach across many languages, an area that is thought not to be covered by the traditional big five, and that's this sixth factor in the hexaco model that's often referred to as honesty, humility. In the next iteration of PQ10, it's not going to replace the current PQ10, it's going to be an extension of it. We're adding in that sixth factor. This is already in use in some areas. This sixth factor that we're calling authenticity, with the two traits of honesty and humility measured by 4 facet scales described in the model here. And we've got exactly the same traits as we had before, but we've divided those out as well. That's largely in response to many people saying, well, look, okay, we respect your statistical purity of only wanting to report independent traits at this level, but in many areas of application, we just want a more detailed picture. Then there might be a little bit of overlap, although we've tried to make these as independent as is practically possible within the development of the next iteration of PQ10. Just very quickly, and Nikita, shout or wave or do something if I'm getting close to time limits, but just to tell you about our dark side personality measure and where that's come from. So we talk about bright side personality. Normal personality is a term that's used, although I guess talking about normal can sometimes be a bit of a tricky concept, but it's who you are when you're not trying. It's, you know, it's your natural you. And of course, there is quite a lot of discussion out there in the personality space about what is sometimes called the dark side of personality or maladaptive personality. And these can be derailing or unhelpful behaviors that often come to the fore when we are under pressure, when things are not going well. This model has come from, again, quite a lot of research undertaken and published by Nigel Gunnoll. He started in this area doing some work with the Hogans, doing large data set analyses, and he came to the conclusion that actually the data analysis didn't really support the presence of all of the scales that were within that model. He was also working with quite a few clinical psychologists at the time and was aware of the work that was going on in the clinical space around the evolution of the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual used in clinical psychology, of DSM-4 through to DSM-5, and there were quite some big changes going on around that. And there's quite a detailed story behind all that that led Nigel to think that there was space in the market for a maladaptive assessment that again seems to get much closer to what's being understood about this area from those kind of areas of research and development of understanding. Essentially, we've got 6 scales here. They're largely the flip side of the big 5, and I'm sure you'd be able to recognize that. So, you know, the flip side of extroversion is people who, when things go wrong, rather than engaging, they just distance themselves and become detached. You know, the flip side of emotional stability is that under pressure, people become emotionally reactive. Rather than maintaining harmony and agreeableness, people will go on the attack. And then we've got some areas around openness and conscientiousness. You know, people who would normally be quite conscientiousness, you know, the derailing side of that can become when you just become completely disinhibited. We've got this extra one that sits outside of that, that's this idea of unconventionality or eccentricity. Again, we've had quite a lot of discussion and debate internally about how we both apply and use these. And one of the things that we experienced was that in using other dark side measures, there was some temptation, and we saw this happen, that, you know, people would see their dark side personality results, and they would often wear their results like a badge of honor. Oh yes, I'm colorful and mischievous. And rather than understanding that as something that might not contribute positively to performance, they seemed to think that that was in some way a strength. And the way in which we use derailers is that we actually conceptualize this, unlike maybe many other areas of personality assessment, as unipolar scales. So a STEN 1 on the reserved scale does not equal sociability. And we treat that in this kind of unipolar way by saying that if you've got a STEN 1 on the reserved scale, we interpret that as there being a low risk of maladaptive behaviors, a low risk of derailing behaviors when under pressure. The higher the score, we treat that as a risk indicator. And the higher the score that you get, the more risk there is that under pressure, these behavioral traits, these maladaptive dark side traits might come to the fore. That's our derailers model and the way that we use it. We could say something about those statistical properties, reliability, validity, construct validity. We can share all of that for anybody who's got a deep interest to get really stuck into the numbers. Very quickly, I said at the beginning, those of us who are here on an evening or a morning, depending on where you are in the world, are here because we are interested in psychometrics. And those of us who are truly interested in psychometrics will be very interested in things like reliability and validity and the latest research and how well the assessment reflects that research. But our experience is that there's a lot out there in the marketplace that persists, it's a terminology that we use internally. People will often, the uninformed market, and of course, the more we can have an informed market, the better we are. But the uninformed market will often want to buy something because they've heard of it, because they like the colors on the page, and because it's bright and shiny. So I just wanted really to finish off by saying that whilst we work very, very hard to develop tests that are psychometrically as good as we can make them, we also realize that the user experience is so important, because to the uninformed market, those psychometric properties alone will not be what sell the instrument for you. People want to make sure that they have a good user experience, and one of the ways that we do that is through our technology platform. We like to brand on behalf of the client, and this is just one example. So when our personality assessments are being used, from the first time they get an invitation, they can be immersed in the brand of the client, and that follows all the way through the experience that they have end to end. I'm not really wanting to dwell on the specifics of that to any great extent, but I think that whilst we're talking about excellence in psychometrics, that only goes so far in making sure that what is out there in the marketplace and used is other quality instruments, because unless we also make sure that the user experience is right, then all of our efforts for psychometric qualities might not win out. And
Absolutely.
that's probably me for time.
Perfect timing. Yes, indeed. On that sombering note, I absolutely love, Carl, that we have plasticity and stability in the PQ10, because to me, plasticity and stability comes up time and time again in different forms, yin and yang, growth and fixed mindsets, etc. But unlike saying it's positive or negative in personality, we say there's bright sides to both plasticity, stability, and they can also be overdone. So like innovation and implementation, and it's really nice to discuss that. I'm just wondering, does anybody have just one or two questions before we move on to Hukama for Carl and Podium? Just either pop the question in the chat or unmute yourself and just jump in.
Hi, if you don't mind, it's Carl. Thank you so much. It's James Meacham, a psychologist at Pencondola. Really loved your talk. Thank you so much. Just wondering if you could share any thoughts you had about the design of those questionnaires in terms of response format, whether you had a particular approach, whether it was normative, ipsative, IRT based.
Yeah, it is certainly normative. For both of those questionnaires, it is a conventional 5 response format, whereby you rate the statements that are given. Just in terms of that item design, just to speak to the derailers thing, one of the things that we were really quite concerned about was to get away from the perception of clinical items. So we've dialed back what might be seen as clinical interpretations to make them more occupationally relevant. But it is a normative. They are both normative, and they are just a conventional 5-point rating scale for each item.
Great, thanks, Carl.
Thank you for such a wonderful question, James. And Carl, talking about those questions, how can one go about trying out the both assessments for themselves?
That's a very good question. And if only I'd thought to prepare an answer for it, we'd be in a much better place. Leave that with me. I will see what can be done to make an assessment opportunity available for attendees here. And I'll pick that up with you after the call, Nikita, and we'll see what we can do.
Absolutely. But if you do want to complete the assessment, pop your name into chat so we can follow up with you, good people, that if you want to complete the 2 assessments, we can then follow up and send it over to you. Sounds good?
No
well,
problem.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carl. We're already getting responses of people who want to complete. Yeah, if you have a first name.
Yes. Just the name or the email as well?
Just the name, just first and second name, so we can track you on LinkedIn. So yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Carl. I wish you the very best with Podium. I can't wait to do the both assessments again and look at my dark side and plasticity and stability, because why not? Thank you, Carl. And are you happy for people to connect with you on
Hi,
LinkedIn as
Nikita,
well?
it's Natalia. Can you
Yeah,
hear
Natalia.
me?
Yep.
Hi. Thank you firstly for setting this up for us. We've only been in the call for half the time, but it's certainly really interesting to hear from others. I'm just conscious of time and I may need to drop off. Can you just confirm if you're sending a recording off the back of this? I know you said you're posting it on the portal, but are you actually emailing one out to everybody?
Well, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, which I'm just popping in the comments. So you can just subscribe to the YouTube channel and you will be notified.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for such a wonderful question and opportunity for us to promote ourselves. Perfect. Thank you, Natalia. And thank you, Carl. Let me remove the spotlight. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the wonderful, one-of-a-kind Rainer Kurtz from Hukama. You might have previously heard him from places like SHL, Savile Consulting, Cubics, but now it's Hukama, and you have a cheeky Big Five assessment you just built fresh off the press.
Okay, thanks, Nikita, for the introduction. My name is Rainer Kurtz. I'm the chief psychologist at Hukama. Hukama stands for Human Capital Management, and the company was founded in 2009 by Michele Guarini in Copenhagen. And I joined about 2.5 years ago. I had 12 years at SHL, then 9 years at Savile Consulting, 6 years at Cubics, and I hope that I will stay more than 3 years at Hukama. And I will show you kind of what we have been working on. If I can manage the screen share.
It's just a little green button.
Okay.
I can see it.
You can see a colorful slide.
Yep, and then you can just click present and then it will be full screen.
Okay, so let's try that. So here we go.
Perfect.
Good. So I'd like to share our perspectives on personality within that symposium. So it was perhaps the easiest symposium to get into ever, because I didn't even have to send an abstract. But there we go. It's a more practical symposium than others. What we've got here on the screen is a picture of the model that we have developed, the success factors model with 8 behavioral factors and a reasoning factor at the center. And I'll briefly basically go through how we came about developing that model, building on what Carl at Podium was talking about. So taking the Big Five as a starting point, but also looking at the grade 8. So looking at the theoretical perspective first, then the main part of the talk is the psychometric angle, and I finish off on some practitioners' perspectives and explain our familiarization offer. So we set out to really predict and develop performance, building on the leading models, the grade 8, the Sills and Church model of potential, and whatever else has been developed in the last 40 years. And we really want to make that as accessible to everyone. So we have general, professional, and executive assessment solutions that differ in their lengths and the number of scales covered. For Hukama, competency prediction has been always quite at the heart of the business, and we are continuing that tradition. And we are also working towards combining personality and ability assessments at factor level to have capability prediction, taking account of both dispositional predictors. And as a result, we get assessment solutions that work across the employee life cycle. So that's Hukama Factors, the whole suite in a nutshell. So we started off looking at tools like OPQ that I started to work with in 1990. I had the good fortune to conduct a meta-analysis with Professor Ivan Robertson and with Andrew Kinder. based on that, we developed the model of inventory of management competencies, which led to the development of the grade 8, which I wrote a book chapter about that you can request from me. All of that fed into Savile Consulting Wave, where I was a co-author. And at Cubics, I put forward the notion of emotional agility. I thought that's a clever term, emotional intelligence and learning agility combined. But then someone told me the term is already copyrighted. So that was the end of that. But that really underpins the competency factors tool. Michele was more on the big 5 side of things. So watching carefully what NEO had to offer, trait descriptive adjectives a la Goldberg, the TDA, which is used for mapping things to the periodic table of personality, the best thing since sliced bread, in my opinion, in academia. Then the International Personality Item Pool is like a public domain version of the various tools that are available on the market. So we build on that in our research design. Co-validation is quite important, that you take the same group of people to complete multiple scales. That's the right thing to do. And we've done that as much as we could in our development so far. And that really leads towards job fit based on personality factors. So that's like our developmental trajectory. The slides will be available later on. So just request from Nikita. As part of the theoretical perspective, we need to emphasize here that we view behavior as a function of the person and the environment. We can't lay the blame for derailment behaviors only at the person. It's usually an environment that contributes to derailment and also to poor or strong performance. So we need to look at the person and the environment they're operating in, and we can look at people's capacity in terms of reasoning ability, their competency in terms of behaviors, their expertise, their knowledge and experience. And for outcomes, we look at motivation and values and key performance indicators. So that's explained more in the book chapter, but remember, it's a person-environment interaction that produces performance as well as affect or well-being. The grade 8 that we developed around the turn of the century, Dave Bartram did a nice article based on the meta-analysis that I kicked off before I fell off the tree. And you can see here that analyzing and interpreting is best predicted by reasoning ability. All the other 7 factors are better predicted by personality than by ability. And so what we are planning to do is build on this kind of data to predict competency factors from personality and ability simultaneously. Then the model that we've come up with, I'll outline here. We've got 8 factors, and in the middle we have reasoning. So general mental ability interacts with the behavioral or personality factors, produce behavior and performance at work. And the model consists of a stability task quadrant. So that's the same stability meta factor that Carl mentioned. And task orientation is about conscientiousness and to some extent elements of openness to get things right. Stability people, bottom left, is about protecting people's feelings. Plasticity task, bottom right, is about moving things forward and on the task end. And plasticity people is moving things forward on the people end. So that's a theoretical model, stability on the left, plasticity on the right, and then task axis and people axis. That's inspired by the Schwartz model of universal values. We've got simpler terms for the top left-hand quadrant. That's all about information or getting it right in performance terms. Bottom left is about emotion, and that's about getting along. Plasticity task is about motivation and getting ahead. And finally, top right, we've got communication, and that's all about getting aligned. So in the success factors model, we have these theoretical constructs, and we can measure them as personality predictors and as matched kind of competency criterion scales. And that's what Hukama factors is all about, an aligned model of predictor and criterion scales. So how did we get there? So a bit about the development and psychometric qualities of the tool. So the theoretical model is about personality and ability being viewed as dispositional measures of potential, and we can measure performance through a competency tool, and we can link these three types of data by predicting competencies from personality and ability data. So that's what Hukama is about. That's what we are interested in. There might be other interesting measurements, but not for us. We are going to be busy bringing those three tools to market and integrating them as much as we can. One slide here about ability factors. We've got an entirely non-verbal measure, 8 minutes of diagrammatic matrices a la Ravens, then number series with an open answer format, and then spatial reasoning, visualizing which cube could be made. The liabilities are good, and alternate forms A and B are available that are half the duration. So this talk is not about abilities on perspectives on abilities, so I leave it just at that one slide, but we have to remember that ability interacts with personality to produce behavior and performance. So I mentioned earlier that we have general, professional, and executive assessment solutions. And so the shortest solution, the questionnaire PF16, not to be confused with 16PF, has 80 items, takes about 10 minutes to complete. The mid-level solution is twice as long, and the full solution is 3 times as long, building in sequence on the previous lower level solutions content. We developed the personality and competency factors tools in parallel to have an aligned model, and to explain how we went about doing that, I've got here a list of half a dozen predictor tools that we looked at. So we took the whole of NEO IP 300 items and made everyone complete those. We picked some additional constructs from OPQ and WAVE and PAPI and factors, the short form of PAPI, and the reflector tool, and that gave us the stock material for the research study on the predictor side. On the criterion side, Michele had been working on transformational and transactional leadership, emotional intelligence, and leadership derailment. So we took these constructs, wrote 4 items per construct, and put them into the development pot. We put in the Hukama 43 competencies that already existed at the time. We put in the grade 8, and we put in the WAVE competencies. So
just a quick question. It's Natalia here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you want me to wait till the end, but I have a burning question here regarding personality factors.
Yeah.
So I can see that you've added 6 personality tools into the analysis, right? Can I just ask, what informed you on selecting those 6 tools? I mean, obviously, some of them that the data against those tools are huge, right? But I just wanted to know if there was more of a back-end minded analysis that guided you into putting those in.
Yeah, so NEO is the academic gold standard on personality measurement with 5 factors measured through 6 facets each. And you could argue that using the NEO IP, you use the silver standard, so almost as good. OPQ and WAVE have the highest ratings on the BPS Psychometric Testing Center website the last time I checked. So they are the most highly regarded tools. PAPI has been around since around 1960. So in the US, that has been a very successful model. The latest version has 26 dimensions. And I worked on that for 6 years and developed the factors short form, which covers the grade 8, but only just about. So we made a 6-factor version instead, a bit like Hexaco, but instead of honesty, humility, we have the opposite there, which is kind of energy drive. And Reflector is like an occupational version of NEO that Hukama has been distributing since 2009. So we want to make sure that we don't miss out on anything important there. So I hope that answers your questions on the constructs that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, thanks very much. I do have another question, but I'm conscious of your time. So maybe if there's time at the end, or we can pick up offline, but I certainly do have another question.
Natalia, if you have another burning question, there's no need to spend your conscientiousness repressing it. So go for it.
Okay, brilliant. So, you know, you've mentioned, I understand that you've put in the creme de la creme of personality factors into the analysis, some of which have had approval from the APS and some of the BPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more globally, because I work for a global organization, right? And if I go in and say, look, this has had BPS and American psychology validation and backing towards it, I guess the bigger picture for them is, what about all the other countries in the world? So I just wanted to know, from the 6 that you have here, is there any paper or something that guided you to say, wherever we take these assessments worldwide across cultures, there is a valid and reliable, consistent, backing of these assessments in the constructs that you were looking at?
Yeah, so I would say that for NEO, you will probably find most citations across most languages and journals and across general, occupational, clinical psychology. For OPQ, there is a mountain of research. I would particularly recommend the 2008 paper by Professor Dave Bartram about the use of global norms, which is quite recommended in the Bartram article. So they compared the results across a dozen or more languages. For WAVE, there's also quite a body of evidence showing quite comparable results across the world. For PAPI, we had a study with 1,000 people across 10 languages, and that turned out pretty similar. The Chinese group was a little bit different with a few quirks. And for the factors tool, I supervised 2 validation studies with global samples. And that was also quite interesting doing first. I can't remember. I think first we did everything apart from North America. And then we applied the equations to North America, and they held up so well that we didn't bother changing them to not capitalize on error. And the Reflector tool has been around for 20 years and also has done, there has been a grade 8 analysis of that. So it's kind of as good as it gets. But of course, when you implement tools, it's more about the practical steps of in each marketplace. The expectations are different. The history of psychometric usage is different. And so in Germany, for example, there's not so much of a psychometric tradition. In the UK, there has been a lot of measurement. In the US, people would be more looking for the Hogan tools.
Yeah, and it is fun. But Natalia, thank you for that question about culture, because this is actually going to be the next topic of our symposium. The next one is going to be cultural differences when it comes to psychometrics. and the different assessments. And we're just actually getting speakers to talk about application of psychometrics across cultures and the little quirks which are present
brilliant.
in each territory.
Brilliant.
So
Oh.
it nicely slides into our next event. So thank you for the plug.
Thank you.
Okay, so we looked at the Young model where each of the big five is broken into two aspects. So we followed that model to have two aspects for each of the 8 factors in the grade 8, and we then varied our composition a little bit in the light of the data. We had 758 items that we asked people to complete. So that took about 2 hours across two parts of the questionnaire. And you can see that the bulk of the items, a bit more than half, is from NEO Big 5 measures, but then also some occupational grade 8 measures, then emotional intelligence. We use most of those items, and the transformational leadership items we used, but very few of the derailment items because they often require prior experience of working in a leadership role. We rejected items that were about voting intentions and religion and national anthems. So we kept them just in for research purposes. We didn't like the moderation facet, which was about eating disorders, I think. We didn't like items about cheating. That doesn't go down well in recruitment settings. And we don't want to have items about yelling at people, insulting people, or having a sharp tongue. Instead, we actually used other items from a more occupational domain. And finally, items such as about tooting your own horn or knowing the answers to many questions. It's not my fault if I know a lot. So these are the kind of items we avoided, and we actually dropped the openness to values facet. All others are covered. And then 466 people participated in 2020 in the study, and the job level representation was pretty good for our target group. And we, of course, will replace it with usage-based norms as we go along. The general module, we put in there the scales that most clearly differentiate the grade 8. And so also in a practical sense, in any job, you need to develop expertise and nowadays also apply technology. So you want to have matching predictor scales such as learning, orientation, and technology focus. We then add another layer for the professional mid-level, and then another layer for the executive level. So that's how we, in a cumulative way, build up from the general through the professional to the executive version, depending on how much time you have and how much money. And that's the way it looks now with the success factors model. So the full Monty, 48 predictor facets and 48 competency criterion facets. We use a 9-point rating scale that we adopted from the trait descriptive adjectives. And if you hit extremely accurate for the 3rd time, the computer says, hang on, let's ask about those 3, which one is most accurate for you. So we have a dynamic tiebreaker, an extreme tiebreaker, and out of 3 you have to say what's most, and then out of the remaining 2 what's most. And we use that for item level reporting, not for psychometric scoring, the ranking. So we've got some fancy scoring going on. So normative formats can be a bit open to impression management. Ipsative formats produce an interdependence. If anything, you would probably want a quasi-ipsative approach, best of both worlds. Anna Brown developed the OPQ version that uses Estonian item response theory to turn forced choice data into normative scales. What we have looked at is the Bartram 1996 ipsatization technique that eliminates acquiescence and we use that to produce interpersonal scores that remove response style, so making it quite robust to any attempts at faking. Okay, so that was a little excerpt from our ITC paper. I just wondered how it would work. But basically, I'm saying that the normative scores correlate a little bit, and the intrapersonal scores are slight negative intercorrelation because they are ipsatized. They behave like ipsative measure. So if you look at the profile of James Gold, for example, we've got the highest scores here for analyst, influencer, and achiever. So we highlight the top 3 scores, and then we take the lowest 2, in this case, implementer, supporter, and that's the bulk of the octet, the wheel report. And we basically interpret the results because we use ipsatized scores. Everyone has some highs and some lows. You can't have a all high or all low wheel, and that is making it very useful for teamwork, team development work, and group reporting, because you get a variety of scores for each individual. We heard about stability and plasticity, so we are using that. We are doing higher order scores for where we compare the scores on stability and plasticity. So for James Gold, he has very much greater focus on plasticities than on stability. So he's go, 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 and leaving a bit behind a kind of bit of chaos and instability. What we also do, we do higher order scores for task and people balance. So for James, there's a much greater focus on tasks than on people. What could possibly go wrong? If you're always pushing for the task to get done, then interpersonal relationships get strained, and also your own your own personal resources get drained. And James Gold was experiencing burnout and also was having outbursts with his boss. That's how this case study came about. So higher order scores are very exciting, and I'm pleased that they are entering the marketplace. Let's also talk about derailment a lot in the marketplace. I personally don't think that we should look at single trades to talk about or assess derailment risk. What we do, we combine the 3 highest and the 2 lowest to indicate derailment risk. It's a strength overdone, which becomes a derailment risk when it's out of balance. So if you're very high achieving, but ruthless, then you get trouble like at Enron. If you're highly ambitious but low in implementer, you might be so pushy, but if you miss out details and don't follow the right process, again, an Enron-like scenario can emerge where things go wrong. And so we look at basically the constellation of high and low scores to identify the derailment risk, and everyone gets 6 outputs that and everything is based in a generic way and as a kind of hypothesis to explore. Another angle is that we look at the extremes of Big 5 scores from the normative scoring. So we list the STEN 10, STEN 9, STEN 10, STEN 1, STEN 9, STEN 2. So the most extreme scores, we indicate what the key strengths are according to that. And as a hypothesis, we look at overuse risk. So if someone is low on change orientation, they maintain and safeguard routines and procedures, and maybe an important critical voice in times of great change. But the overuse risk is they may meet change with resistance and need longer time to adjust. So people tend to find themselves in here, and that's part of the personal report that people can download themselves if the system is set up in that way. some psychometric in-depth reporting features. Generally, we use a STEN grid, and then we can indicate the range of scores. So we use item level STEN scores, item level norming, and that gives us a view on which scales measure more accurately for this person, and for which scales there is diversity of scores, divergence, and we should probe more into those scales with a wide range. We also look at the talent gap, where we compare the last item in the set to the rest, to the overall past set. So where perhaps learned behaviors are shown that are not supported by needs, or the other way around. Then intrapersonal scores, that's basically the Ipsatized score. We show that that's particularly valuable when people are extremely high or extremely low on acquiescence. Then you get a lot of splits here with intrapersonal scores showing how someone might behave under pressure. So I've got in the slides here more detailed example. Here the range is particularly high for goal orientation. So someone endorsed highly several of the items, but also said, I lack achievement drive. That is reverse scored. So that's the value that creates this then 2 for goal orientation. So just to illustrate how it all works, for the expert report, you get item level information, and R means reverse scored. Talent gap. So here is an example for a challenge. The challenge item, why is the talent gap there? I accept challenges is highly endorsed, and 2 of the other items are not so highly endorsed. So that's why the overall facet is a bit lower. And so while the person perhaps doesn't throw themselves into tasks with passion and is not that motivated, they do accept the challenge. So we can explore that and look at talent gaps, where talent gaps basically indicate some burnout risk. Finally, the intrapersonal indicator, we've got the Ipsatized score here. So for determination, the score is high, STEN 8, but under pressure, that would be the defining feature, the defining value. That's something that this person wouldn't let go, getting things done with tenacity and determination. It gets very colorful then when you get all 8 factors, and there's an interactive online report where these features can be switched on and off, and there are also factor level scores. So it's quite funky, and you can roam around the expert report online. So it's all landscape, ideal for Skype and Teams. Psychometrically, we measure the general factor of personality. The first column here shows what underpins the general factor of personality: adaptability, empowerment, optimism, determination, challenge, and persuasiveness have the highest loading. There is a low loading for orderliness, so there is still hope for me. We also look at task versus people. We get a nice big 5 solution, and we get a reasonable grade 8 solution. So that's my idea of fun. Sad, isn't it? Reliabilities, we aimed at a mean of 0.75.
Sorry, you didn't see my chat. You're out of time, my good sir, so you just need to wrap up.
Okay, so it's all hunky-dory, and I can perhaps move to the last slide, where I explain how you can become familiar with all of this. We run quarterly courses, and there are 3 modules. If you're already BPS level 2 trained or training with Carl at Podium, then you're exempted from the first module. And as a special offer for you people, we do the module 2 free of charge. So if you please contact me. And I put on the slides a self-registration link where I can try out the tool. So thanks a lot. And are there any questions?
Oh, well, we need to skip the questions, I'm afraid, Rainer, because can you put this self-registration link into the chat? That'd be super useful so people can access it.
Yeah,
So
I've done that already.
that would be
But I
perfect.
do it again.
Thank you very
I
much.
do anything, Nikita.
Well, thank you very much, Rainer, and thank you for enlightening us about the developments you have on the Big Five and how it builds on all the different assessments that went before. So thank you very much to Hukama. And oh, you send it to me, I'm afraid, as a direct link, so other people won't see it. So you can just send a general, send to all. Perfect. So you can
Go.
Fantastic. So there you can try out Rainer's tool. Thank you very much, Rainer, and thank you, Hukama. And on that note, it gives me great pleasure to introduce colleagues from Lumina. So I have the pleasure to introduce the wonderful TC and the wonderful Vonnie. So let me just spotlight you guys. Spotlighted one and add to spotlight. Fabulous. Now with Lumina, they have an interesting perspective on personality. Somebody would say even a multi-leveled perspective on personality. So would you care to kick us off, good people?
Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much, Nikita, and thanks so much, Carl and Rainer. Really interesting to see all the research and everything behind all the work that's been gone into these psychometric assessments. Now, just to lay my cards on the table, I am not a psychologist. I do not have a psychology background. I am purely on the psychometric side of things. I do understand our model, etc. I'm not going to be getting into words like normative or ipsative or anything like that. But if there are any questions around the reliability, the validity, anything like that, my colleague Vonnie does have a psychology degree and can help answer those. And of course, Nikita can jump in and help answer any questions around there. And I'm more than happy to follow up with anybody with the actual underlying research into this. What we'll be doing on this call is just showcasing the Lumina Spark model, some of our digital tools that help support with our assessment tool, and also some of the work that we've done recently with a really exciting project called Inspire 2020 or Inspire 22, which Vonnie will be showcasing at the end of this, as well as some of the research that we've done and some research that's upcoming that you can be involved in, which we'd be really appreciative of. So with no further ado, I will share my screen. If you'll just give me 1 second here.
Ta-da! We can see it. You can click full
Brilliant.
Screen.
Excellent. Thank you. So as I said, I'm not going to be going into the research, the validity behind it, but more than happy to share that. We do have all that information to hand, and I'm more than happy to share the numbers after the call with anybody who's interested. With Lumina Spark, we are also quite a young psychometric. We've been around since 2009, developed by Dr. Stuart Desson. One of the things when Stuart was creating this assessment and creating the psychometric was really focusing on removing any evaluative bias out of a psychometric model. And I'm sure people have seen previously when you're looking through psychometrics or you're experiencing some sort of questionnaire. And there's things like, oh, an extroversion, outgoing, excited, life of the party, gregarious. And you look at introversion, it's like meek, timid, shy, withdrawn. So right away, even if you tend towards introversion or tends towards having less extroversion, you're having that evaluative bias of going, I want to be the fun guy over here, not this meek, timid person over here. And with that, that's where we really look to use inclusive and strong language in terms of, instead of meek, timid, shy, we're looking at things such as, takes time to consider their options, measured speaking, preferring one-to-one conversations, that sort of thing. We are based on the big 5 factors of personality as well. The Lumina Spark model itself, we do go into the first 4 of the big 5. So we look at, we measure openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. We don't necessarily delve deep into that neuroticism aspect within this part of the model. We do have a separate emotional intelligence model that will highlight as well. And it's actually some of the research that we've been doing into this Inspire 2020 or 22 project, which Vonnie will highlight after the call. We take a traits-based approach. And what we mean by that is we're not measuring type. We're not typing you and saying, oh, because you're this, that means you're going to exhibit these behaviors. We explore your qualities. We have 24 qualities that we explore. And from that, that helps define where you sit around 8 aspects around the mandala. And I'll showcase that for you as well. Within our tool, we measure 3 different personas individually. And what we mean by that is we measure your underlying persona, your everyday persona, and your overextended persona. And that's when Carl was speaking earlier about the dark side, going into those overextensions. What does that look like? So for us, we do measure independently what it is you like to do. So when you're at your most comfortable with friends or family, how you present yourself to the world. So that everyday persona, when you're on calls with colleagues or peers, how do you present yourself? How does your personality or your persona shift into that area? And we can take a look at, where can you utilize some of those strengths maybe too much, or how can they be viewed as maybe being moving from logical into being argumentative. Maybe somebody with high empathy might interpret your high logical sense or your high logical quality as being argumentative. And maybe somebody with high logic might interpret somebody with high empathy as being emotionally stretched. And these are areas that you can step into just from stressors, deadlines being imposed on you, and obviously just different factors that can impact your persona. We have 144 items in terms of questions where we measure independently each one of those 3 personas twice. So we're measuring all those twice. 48 questions by 3 makes up the 144 items. And we do have a digital suite of supporting tools with this. One of the things that we really recognize, of course, going through the pandemic is there wasn't the option for face-to-face facilitation, face-to-face workshops, face-to-face qualifications, what have you. And we really heavily leaned on the fact that we are supported by technology, and we support our tools through our technology. And with that, we've been able to start qualifying individuals to use our model virtually, where we have virtual classrooms, virtual online learning. We have digital tools to help support with development, such as a digital coaching assistant, which I'll highlight quickly on here as well. One of the things that, like, our purpose is to be able to, as I said, I'm not a psychologist, but I really do resonate with the model. So we look to have really clever data, but with really simple, intuitive ways of understanding that and connecting with it. And from that, that's what we want to do, is we want to be able to qualify people to be able to work with our model internally for their different learning and development goals. We want to be able to just get that capability internal within different organizations so that they can utilize our model as part of their learning and development, organizational development goals. This here comes to the Luminous Spark mandala. Around the mandala, we have what we call the 8 aspects, which are measured around, as I said, the first 4 in the ocean model of the big 5. And in each one of the aspects, we have the 3 qualities that make up, what we say make up each one of these aspects. And this is what we're measuring around the mandala here. We're measuring all these different 24 qualities. And from the responses, that's how we identify your different personas and where you sit within these different 8 aspects. We also measure, as I said, the overextended persona. So this is when what's been mentioned previously, your dark side, your bad day behavior, etc. For us, we call that an overextension. So it's where can some of those strengths possibly be turned into what could be perceived as a stressor or as a weakness, perhaps. This is where you are moving, either utilizing some of those strengths too much, or you're recognizing that you're stepping into that stressful space and you are not utilizing some of your other strengths that you can lean on, et cetera. And that's something that we can work through as well. This is part of our portrait here. So as you're working through the portrait, again, there's that simple language piece where we really want people to start connecting with the language that we use and what that means and how they can interpret that in terms of understanding their own personality. So we start taking a look with just a simple word cloud around the 24 qualities. And you've all seen word clouds before. The larger the word and the more centered it is within the word cloud, the more that person has resonated with that particular quality. So with this example here, somebody's leading with high competitive, high takes charge, high conceptual and imaginative. So these are all sitting up in some of the aspects here, which you'll see actually when we start drilling that down. What does that mean if you have high competitive, high takes charge, and being quite tough in your approach. So that ability to handle difficult conversations. That's where this outcome focus comes into play. So this person here, this example that we're using, they're leading with high outcome focus, followed with some big picture thinking and introversion. And we'll see that as we work through here. But this is just starting people to get that, to identify with the different qualities that make up their persona, where they're really strong in, where they might not resonate with as much, and then leading into those 8 different aspects that we have focused around the mandala. This leads into creating your splash. So a luminous splash. And again, I know, I think Carl and Rainer were both saying about, colorful, bright and shiny. How do people resonate with them? And that's one of our focuses, is just to make it as simple to connect with as possible and get you an understanding as to where you sit within your personality and how that resonates with others, how that affects your communication styles, your perception, etc. And that's what your splash is made out of. So your splash, you can see this octopus-looking thing on the screen here. What this means is the longer the arm is, the more that you've resonated with that particular aspect. And with the arm curving in specific ways, that shows how much you've resonated with the aspect beside it. These have been positioned around the mandala in a specific way because they are correlated. So somebody with high inspiration driven does have a tendency to have more of that big picture thinking. And you can see how this person here, it is a little bit more associated with big picture thinking than that people focus aspect.
Fabulous. By the way, good people, if anybody wants to complete Spark for themselves and get their splash and all that lovely report and coach and app, pop your name in the chat, and then we can forward it on. So we can leave a little bit of mystery. So thank you so much, TC, for such a beautiful introduction. It's just Vonnie is on the call, and I just can't wait for Vonnie to share some research, how she's been using this splash and this report and send the people to the Arctic, because that's exactly what you do. You complete a psychometric and you go to the Arctic, because that's the way it's done. So Vonnie, can you tell us how you've been using all this colorful goodness?
Absolutely. And I'll actually very quickly correct you, because it's not the Arctic, it's the Antarctic.
Oh, right. Well, my evidence base is very low, I guess, and memory skills. Could be all sorts of factors.
TC, can I quickly ask you to stop sharing, because I can't share over you?
Yes. Done.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. All right. So can I get a quick nod or any sort of movement?
We can see it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, I hope TC gave you enough of an introduction. If not, I will fill in the cracks. But we figured it would be useful to show you guys something we've been working on recently, which is incredibly exciting for all of us in Lumina, but hopefully really exciting for the world when it takes finally the shape of a research articles, hopefully multiple. So the idea here is Inspire 2022 is, well, I've actually given you a bit of a contents before that. I've broken it down into, who are Inspire 2022, then how we got involved, and then what we have coming up, plus a very polite invitation. But I've also included a lot of photos, because what are words if there's no proof of it, right? So first things first, Inspire 2022. So this is actually a combined research team between the British military and also civilian medical personnel. These are guys that have little to no experience in such harsh environments. So it was incredibly exciting to see how they go there and cope with it. So the idea of the research was to effectively go and pretty much test the limits of the human body in these circumstances. They had to ski roughly about 1,100 kilometers from the edge of the Antarctic mass to the South Pole, where they were going to be conveniently picked up and brought home to their families. They were anticipating 50 days. In reality, it took them about 48, actually, which is great, which is awesome. And luckily, all of them made it back, because with this type of research, not everyone makes it back, unfortunately. The research itself had 4 stages. The first one was the Caledonian Serpent, which was conducted in Scotland, and it was 5 days where they actually prepared for, living and surviving in extreme winter weather. The Nordic Serpent was next, which was conducted February to March last year, which was actually 10 days in Norway, which further kind of solidified and developed their skills to, pitch a tent or, cook in minus 50 degrees type of skills. The third step was the Saxon Serpent, which was actually a series of team workshops, and just to refine those skills, help them train physically, but also get them to know each other as a team, because this is actually a multicultural team. We had people coming from the States, from Argentina, from Denmark as well. So it was kind of refining those interpersonal skills. The final stage is what we're actually going to be talking about today, which is the actual big shebang. After pretty much a year and a half preparation, what happened when they made it down to the South Pole. So in a nutshell, the aim of the expedition was to see how the human body will respond. Specifically, they were testing how a plant-based diet can sustain a human being in sub-zero temperatures, and also to test the effectiveness of wearable technologies. The aim for that, furthering from that, is to test whether any of this can be used in military deployment, and then also support the more civilian side of medicine, which is if, post-operation, for example, you go home and need to be monitored, you could actually release a bed in a hospital for someone who actually does need it more, and be taken home with a watch or a ring, a flashy monitor that would be able to notify your doctor immediately if any changes occur. Ultimately, we got involved because we wanted to support the team. We wanted to help them understand themselves better, but also help them understand each other better and work together to, again, help them come back safe and sound. So this is a couple of pictures of the team. Very, very lovely views here. Also, fun fact, if you guys didn't know, the Antarctic doesn't have any time zones. Researchers tend to operate on their own time zone. So if you see a mix and match of different times, that's the reason for it. But it was a team of 9. And all of these are the lovely humans that I got the pleasure and privilege to meet. And they are just as happy and smiling in person as they are in these pictures. This is a quick map of the distance. I appreciate it doesn't do it any justice, but this was taken roughly about two-thirds of the way there. So this is the South Pole, and then this is the point that they were dropped at the Antarctic. We then have some photos of how their research actually went. They had to obviously create these tents and measure their oxygen levels, their blood pressure, their levels of fat, apologies if I don't know the actual term, and a bunch of other things every 3 to 4 days. We then have some data, some really cool pictures. This is how it looked like. And from what I hear, again, this has not yet been fully kind of wrapped up in a nice document, but they're coming back with a lot, basically. This is a picture of the wearable technology that they brought with them. They brought a bunch of stuff. They brought watches, they brought Oura rings, which I know are already in use in certain circumstances, and some additional bracelets and so on and so forth. Now, how we got involved in more detail, we supported their team day, which was held in Sandhurst last September. We helped them with providing the Lumina Spark debriefs one-to-one, and also holding the team session for them. Again, highlighting their everyday, on a good day, how are you likely to show up, but also what happens on a not so good day. How could you compromise your own safety and also the safety of the team? And ultimately, how to counter that. We also took it a step further, and we involved the 5th factor, the biolumina emotion. Again, we did the one-to-one debriefs to showcase their internal values and predispositions, again, on a good day and also on not so good day. And again, in relation to themselves, in terms of the self-awareness piece, but also as to how to counter that when it comes to the safety of the team. Just very briefly on Lumina Emotion, very, very similar to Lumina Spark in the sense of that it's a questionnaire. It has actually 96 items, so it's slightly shorter. And instead of 24, it measures 16 emotional qualities. So just a quick reference point. This is actually my Lumina Spark splash. Don't worry, it's not fake. It's actually real. As TC explained, the 4 factors, and then this is what Lumina Emotion mandala looks like. So as you can see, for each of the different aspects, we have 2 sides. So obviously high, low, this is low, this is high on agreeableness. In luminal emotion is we, again, measure only one factor, the neuroticism. We have low neuroticism, high neuroticism. And we've renamed those into reward reacting and risk reacting. So the lower you score on neuroticism, the more likely you are to be reacting to the reward. You know, what's in it for me? Whereas the more neurotic you are, the more likely you will be showing. The more likely it is that you will be showing is someone who's reacting against the.
Talking about neuroticism and reaction.
I know.
Let's. So what did we find with all this wearables, all this tech, with all the psychometrics and Sandhurst?
Yes.
What's the findings?
So what we found is a team. Well, actually, this is actually snapshots from Sandhurst. We're still doing the whole research wrap up. So we're still on stage 1, which is what happened before they went. So before they went, we can see on average the team actually ended up being in the same place. They were all outcome focused, all discipline driven. In every day, so on a good day, we actually had a good blend of people, which is great. We had a lot of people being very people focused, very much, you know, how do we do this as a team? Outcome focused, you know, how do we actually achieve this? And also down to earth / introverted is in how do we practically do this? In overextension, we noticed that the team actually reverted back to their average. So people were very much structured to rigid. They were very much going to the argumentative and, you know, overbearing stages of their behavior. So a couple of brief words, which I will leave for about 5 seconds for you to read if you'd like, from the team. They found that very, very insightful. We actually have a couple of videos on our LinkedIn, LinkedIn page, which you can see, you know, even more candid shots of the team. And this is a really cool photo for me anyways, because of all the countries that took part in this research. You see the little country of Lumina right in the middle with our flag. And ultimately, the next steps for this specific project is we're going to do the second batch of the portraits to see how the team actually changed after this, well, dramatic and one-of-a-kind lifetime event, which we're currently doing. We're then going to do this again at 6 and 12 months to see how much of that is going to be retained or changed. And obviously, how does this impact future research? And on the topic of future research, I wanted to very briefly invite all of you to kind of look at these topics. We're currently looking to do some research on aging at work, or more specifically, how people's experiences changes as obviously they grow older. Some opinions and views on ageism as well, both observed and personal. We're then also doing some bits around cybersecurity to highlight how personality could be a major factor in staying safe online. And we're also doing some comparison research. And if you would like to get involved, please feel free to email this email address. I'll pop it in the chat for you. Yeah, and just let us know what topic, and that would be pretty much it. So hopefully that was exciting. If you guys have any questions, I don't know if I have time, Nikita, more than happy to pick those up.
Absolutely. It's just, we're going to leave the questions till the end, but to me, from my perspective, it's just been so great to see an application of Spark. And it was great to see the tool. Thank you, everybody who posted in the chat, who wants to try it out. We'll follow up with each and every one of you. Please, Vonnie, Andrew, are you happy to connect on LinkedIn with people as well?
Absolutely. Already have.
Fantastic. Well, you know, social media addiction can be productive at times. But now, thank you so much, Lumina people. And I'm so happy to introduce Ron Warren. Ron, considering the world is round and your tool is a 360, I think that's a good kind of handover.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So my name's Ron Warren. I'm from LMAP. This is a bit more macro than the presentations previously, but we can look at other stuff. I mean, this sort of sums it up for me. You're fair, compassionate, and intelligent, but you're perceived as biased, callous, and dumb. This was the first page of my book proposal, by the way. So it sort of just articulates what's the difference between self-assessment and 360, although we also see quite the opposite as well, that people are very hard on themselves and they're perceived by other people as fabulous. So it's not always cutting the negative way. LMAP's quite a different kind of 360, I think. As we just saw, most personality assessments are self-assessments, and historically that's been the case. But leaders commonly self-assess quite differently than how they're perceived by other people. And other people on your team interact with you not based on how you see yourself, but on the behaviors they experience from you. Most 360s measure competencies. And actually, I built competency tools back in the 80s and 90s. And frankly, I found it pretty boring. It was just sort of garbage in, garbage out stuff. And there wasn't like an integrative function like personality is. So in a sense, I sort of look at personality as the general contractor of human capital. If you look for the common denominator, and probably Rayner's research would address this, the thing that keeps competencies together well or not is someone's personality and how they interact with others and self-manage themselves. So that's why for the last 25 years, I focused on personality as opposed to competencies. In most 360 reports, and I think we've seen a little of it here too, it's bar charts and numbers. It's sort of a number dump. So a lot of data is thrown at you. So I didn't grow up in the IO field. I grew up doing developmental psychology. And as we learned from developmental psych, especially people like Vygotsky and Piaget, people think in words, especially around complex self-management and interpersonal dynamics. They don't think in numbers. It's literally how the brain develops. So LMAP reports are very conversational, in-depth narratives that sort of emulate a coaching conversation. And I say sort of because, in a coaching conversation, it's a conversation. In a report, it's sort of a monologue. What would you say to this person, given that you have this data, and what would be important for them to hear? So reports are pretty personalized in that, areas that are covered in one set of reports may not be covered near as much in another set. In other words, people who are very task focused and not very high EQ versus somebody who's, more deferring and strong EQ, but not very results oriented. The final thing is most assessments are one-time events. We built into LMAP called LMAP Pulse, which tracks a leader's progress and continues a leadership conversation around the one behavior they want to modify. So you get a 360 report, which is pretty gestalt, by the way. It's not trait by trait, and I'll show you some of that. And what we want people to get is the main message. Where's their upside for you to develop one behavior, either start, stop, or improve what you are naturally, your natural behavioral style. And sometimes we even mention, why would you do this? Well, because you get paid to do this. I mean, it's really part of your job in a leadership role. Even though most of the personality assessments seem to be self-assessments, if you look at the classic psych writings, people talk about the behavioral expression, the impression it creates on others. So, Raymond Cattell, the 16PF, Lindsay, the Stanford psychologist, you can go down the line. So even though theoretically it's been more addressed, practically there aren't as many personality 360s. So in study after study since the 50s, no matter where, no matter when, 70% of employees said the worst, most stressful part of their job is their immediate boss. Just one sort of impact of derailers. So what we're in the business of is using 360 measures to assess what are personality behavioral drivers, so things that drive high performance, and things that derail high performance. So I'm just curious, what do people say are about the percent of professionals who have relatively prominent derailers? And I don't mean in the absence of performance drivers. I mean, just, in the normal population. I guess with 100 people or something, it's hard to ask questions. But, Hogan says 65 to 85% using self-assessment data. We see in the 70 to 75% range that people have derailers. They're present in their profiles, especially as rated by others. So you might ask why, and again, my background's back in sociobiology, developmental psychology. And if you look at the history of humans, 2.5 to 3 million years up till 10,000 years ago was the Stone Age. I mean, Rayner mentored, the interaction of personality and environment, and the environment's greatly changed. We had the agrarian age around farming, 8,000, 9,000 years ago, then the industrial age, and they all get shorter into the information age. I don't know what age we're currently in, but the Stone Age was 99.999% of human evolution. And just like all animals that evolved over this time, we have really prominent derailers that are in the form of dominance and deference, just like every other animal. We're like animals, that's what we are. So this is the US version. There's a current version of what it looks like in the UK. So we're not alone in this kind of stuff. And it is interesting that we pick leaders like that. So this is what we measure. There are 13 traits, and I'll show you a different version of how it plays out. This is what it looks like. But the core areas are the things on the top: grit, task mastery, social intelligence, teamwork. There are 3 traits of each that contribute to that, and they're very positively associated with performance in a leadership role. The traits on the bottom, which correlate mainly with derailers, are deference traits and dominance traits. So there's 6 positive drivers of personality that lead to high performance and 7 common derailers. And even though you tend to study this stuff at the level of groups, idiopathically, in other words, as individual profile sets, you can get all kinds of combinations. Even though helpfulness here on the feedback is 76% and hostility is 91%, at a group level, they're highly orthogonal traits, but they coexist commonly in individuals. So we look at profiles and have an algorithm that analyzes what are the most prominent behaviors and how do they interact with each other to provide a gestalt picture. In a sense, when I met with people and I did stuff particularly with competencies, they would say to me, what does this all mean? I see the, 14 areas I'm really strong and 17 that I'm weak. And well, what does this all mean? And it's hard to do it on that level. And one of the things that I think LMAP is designed for is to communicate to people in plain English. What does this all mean? Looking at what are the most prominent drivers you have in your profile and what are the most prominent derailers. About 20% of people have very top-heavy profiles. I think I have a graphic. No, I took it out. So meaning they have traits that are primarily at the top of the profile and very little on the bottom. About 65%, 60% of people have a mix like this character. Some derailers, some strengths, and actually some complementary strengths in the EQ domain. And about 15% of people who make it into leadership have very bottom-heavy profiles. In other words, the people who work with them, and on average, we have 13 raters for every individual. really don't see any performance drivers, but mainly see derailment factors. And there's all kinds of reasons that can occur, including that you're really smart, but you don't have the self-management or interpersonal strengths to help somebody to be a more effective leader. One of the things I should say is that we update our samples about every 2 or 3 years. And our last sample was about 40,000 feedback raters and about 3,800 self-assessments. And we don't do our own stats. They're jobbed out in a trade, essentially, with Brian Connolly, who's a pretty well-known psychometrician at the University of Toronto. And he's converted our stuff into Big Five and stuff. So underlying this, there is a Big Five, which is where we publish research findings. But operationally, I actually prefer to circumflex to show a picture of what's going on. We also collect data across 3 domains. So we collect LMAP profiles, like I just showed you about that, which are psychological measures. They're accompanied by a profile, a normative profile, an interpretive report that's plain English, that's sort of in a conversational narrative. And we also give them item level feedback. They're also compared to norms. We collect 6 kinds of performance or effectiveness ratings from the raters. And these are non-psychological, almost look like performance management kinds of measures, performance review kinds of things. And comments, qualitative comments. So, 3 on strengths, three that typically elicit comments about strengths, and then 3 around what would you like to see this person change, start, stop, and continue. And what we teach in our trainings is how do you triangulate these 3 measures? Because they're quite highly correlated. So there are certain sets of effectiveness ratings you see with certain kinds of profiles. There are certain kinds of comments that are common with profiles and effectiveness rating. And that way you have 3 different kinds of data sets to work from. So if somebody says to me, hey, Mr. Warren, I really dig your LMAP writing, but I don't really think I'm that competitive. And it's probably what makes me one of the most effective people is that, these other skills that I have. Well, I can either look at the effectiveness ratings and we can talk about, well, do other people think you're so effective? Or comments, which may mention 5 or 6 times competitive or immodest behaviors that get in the way. So it's a way to show people, hey, there's 3 different data sets that together, it's sort of a convergent validity for the end user. I'm going to just show you a sample report. Then I think you'll get a better sense of, sort of what we do. And what we do is primarily focused on, something went wrong here. Well, anyway, primarily focused on generating a data, a report. This is, I'm sorry, but this is showing up as.
Oh, you need to re-click share the screen and then you'll get the option to choose a different one.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna have to move it to make it a little smaller. So one thing I guess I could start with is reports vary from 80 to 110 pages, let's say, probably 75 to 110 pages. And there's a generic introduction that explains, why this might be of interest to somebody and, who are raters and how does that work? Then profiles. And I've just highlighted, hey, what do I notice when I look at a report? This guy has 18 raters, your self-profile. I'd say pretty good convergence in a lot of areas, not a radically different sort of imprint on self versus feedback. One thing I notice is pretty domineering but about average social skills, which is nice. Because a lot of times people the Lumina people say would overextend there. Well, you might overextend, or if you have other, balancing traits, it can work out in a pretty balanced way. And then we have rater breakouts. These are what effectiveness ratings look like. So I'm jumping, 72 pages in here now. So here's a sample average. So that's the average based on 40,000 raters for this item. And by the way, we have US and global norms and generate different norm sets when needed. Sort of a left side pattern. By left side, I mean predominant traits are on the left side. So what you expect then is somebody who's pretty results oriented. See here, a nice average score. Now an average score compared to our data sets, which are pretty senior management people who attend high level trainings. I mean, our customers are, Yale School of Management, about 18 years. We were at HBS, the Advanced Management Program, 5 years. We're at Cornell doing work. So we work in a lot of business schools, but also, organizations like UL, Underwriter Labs, Bearing Point. So we have a pretty high-end sample as well from like hospital systems. We're big in hospital systems. And what we see is people with left-sided profiles, they're pretty results oriented. So they score, pretty good compared to others. Ability to produce results here, it's a pretty high score, 622 versus a 581. And just to let you know, because it's a sort of limited distribution on performance, anything below a 5 is sort of a red flag. And anything above 6 is pretty high performance category. And then there are comments. Why did you rate this person at this level of effectiveness? I'll sort of scan what goes with the profile, what doesn't. But what we're looking for is patterns. So I'm sure if anyone else who collects data on qualitative data, they're looking for patterns, not one-offs. One person says you're a perfectionist out of 56 comments. I don't think you're probably a perfectionist, but we're looking for themes like, I feel like I'm being quizzed. I wish he was more patient during conflict, comes across as dismissive to ideas, all left side domineering patterns, open to more dialogue. So even though this guy has skills in the EQ domain, they need to exercise them more. So I can just tell you, we have an algorithm that drives 225 different feedback profiles. So 225 permutations of different profiles, each custom written for that personality. So even knowing like, hey, this person's, this person wants it straight. They don't want to be coddled. They don't want to be, varnished language versus somebody who's maybe more sensitive, approval seeking. It's a gentler report. So different styles in the reporting as well. Let me go back to just, I think.
I think you touched upon something very important, Ron. So you tailor the language of the report to the individual's personality reading it.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And also, I see a book there.
Yes.
Can you tell
so
us?
Anyway, I wrote a book a couple of years ago. Actually, it took a couple of years after 25 years of doing this stuff to literally just read and then write. And it's written to have a good reading experience. It's not a huge data-driven kind of thing. It's really story-driven. And part of which I wrote to say, part of my background where you mix drivers and derailers is that, with my partner, Ornath, who's also on, we worked in another assessment company back in the 80s and 90s. And during that time, one of our specialty areas was training in commercial aviation. So we trained cockpit crews at British Airways, at UPS. And, so you don't focus just on strengths or just on weaknesses, because it's the blend of those things that either lead to great cockpit management skills or common mistakes, which lead to accidents. So it's not like you buy the derailers or you buy, that's how people are. That's normal people. So our stuff is a blend of that usually. And I'll let it go at that. Thank you so much, though.
Thank you so much, Ron. By the way, if anybody wants to know more about LMAP and the book, pop your name in the chat and we'll follow up with you, good people. So yeah, any questions for Ron, as we still have 5 minutes before 6?
Yeah, hi, it's James again from Pencondola. Ron, thank you so much. Really interesting talk. Thinking about diversity, not inevitably, but sometimes we see the same behaviors in the workplace being judged differently depending on where they come from. So as an example, you might see a man who's described as being assertive, whereas a woman who's doing similar things might be described as sort of bossy, or in more negative ways, for instance, because there's something about people's expectations and stereotypes. So I was just interested in terms of the LMAP, do you see any sort of patterns in terms of gender differences or racial differences when it comes to those effectiveness ratings?
We have no gender differences, surprisingly, is associated with effectiveness. And there are some, accentuations by one gender or the other, but not at a significant level, and certainly not related to effectiveness. However, I remember a woman at Underwriter Lab said, when I go into a meeting, and people don't listen to me as much as the men. So we don't cover that domain, I think. It's just not how we measure stuff. But it's another layer of what goes on. All of this stuff is multidimensional. It's not a dimension that we're tapping into. But it's going on. It's just not what we focus on. Yeah. Or not what our measures seem to have been highly sensitized to, let's say it that way.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, thank you.
We do chart rater differences, though. Now, it's not by male or female rater, it's by relationship. And those can be very interesting. I mean, I don't know, have you read the no asshole rule? The most popular HBR article in history. And we'll see that kind of stuff where, people who are bullies or assholes are very hostile downwards to direct reports, but lovely to their manager and their customers. So you'll see real illustrations of what a rater difference is and what does that portray in an individual. And it's nice because you're saying to somebody, you can turn this on and off. And you need to turn it on more with direct reports. Yeah. Meaning your social skills.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you so much, Ron. And one last question or any reflections before we close for today?
And Nikita, I'd just like to say what a fantastic couple of hours this has been. Really, really excellent. So thank you to all of our presenters who've done an outstanding job, and great to see you in particular, Ron.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm just going to save the chat so we know who to follow up with. Please join the LinkedIn community. So we have that on Personality Academy. Let me just find it for you. It's called Psychometrics Academy. It's a group, and we share all our events there. The next event will be probably in a month's time. and we're going to focus on cultural differences and personality, as previously mentioned and touched upon, which I think is quite an exciting topic. So if any of you know any specialists in changes of personality and cultures, oh, please feel free to connect. These events are free. All we encourage you to do, if you found the event useful today, donate to a charity of your choice. So next time you're in your local shop, pop a couple of more items into the food bank bin, because, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to help in the world of ours. And if this can be a reason to do so, we're happy for it to be that. So otherwise, thank you everyone to our fantastic speakers, for Ron covering the value of 360 and the wonderful assessments that the 360 can bring, as well combined with your self-report and that little pulse to make sure the changes are consistent. For the wonderful people at Lumina showing us that personality is multidimensional, whether you stick to your home or go to the, I want to say Antarctic, am I right? Yes, done. So I can listen. Well, it's a 50-50, so, you know, I might be just lucky today. Thank you very much for Rainer to show us that wonderful legacy of assessments that we explore and we try out and we see what sticks and what works. And it's wonderful. You have another assessment to add to your portfolios. Now you have OPQ, Savile Wave, FAPI, and what's the name of the Hukama assessment? Because I was listening too much to the Arctic.
Hukama factors.
Hukama factors, brilliant to add to your rich portfolio of the impact on our wonderful profession. And thank you so much, Carl, for the wonderful explanation of plasticity, stability, big five, bright side, dark side. Oh, I bet of those derailers. And thank you everyone for who attended today's session. It's wonderful to geek out with all of you this afternoon. But if you just cannot stop out geeking out, I have wonderful colleague Eloise who will be hosting a research symposium straight after that. I'm actually eating into her time right now. Sorry, Eloise. So if you want to relog back in, and then you will have experience of what students are doing as far as research. So if you want to keep geeking out, you can. Otherwise, this will be on YouTube in the next couple of days. Please join the LinkedIn group Personality Academy. I'm just popping it into the chat. Here it is. And otherwise, thank you, wonderful speakers. It's brilliant to see such assessments. We'll keep the conversation going and have a very wonderful evening, everybody, wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, Nikita.
Pleasure.